hero is abandoned by a cruel and cowardly family, but weeks later, a miracle happened that left everyone with their mouths open. Anthony was a man who had many things: a big house, beautiful cars, and a lot of money. But do you know what he didn't have? A true friend. People around him only seemed to be interested in his money, and that made him very sad. He felt alone, although he was always surrounded by people. One day, while Anthony was walking through the park trying to forget his sorrows, he saw a group of children playing with a very cute and lively puppy. The puppy, who was called Achilles, ran from one side to the other, wagging his tail and making everyone laugh. Achilles didn't have a home, he was a puppy who lived in the park. Anthony watched Achilles and saw how happy and affectionate he was, despite not having many things. That touched Anthony's heart. He thought, this puppy doesn't need money to be happy, he just needs friends and affection. It was then that Anthony decided that Achilles would be the friend he was looking for. He took Achilles home and took care of him with all his heart. With Achilles close, Anthony's house, which was previously silent and sad, was filled with joy. Achilles loved to run through the corridors and bring his toys so that Anthony would throw them. They spent hours playing together in the garden. Anthony discovered that true happiness does not come from the things you have, but from the friends who are by your side. Before Achilles came into his life, Anthony was going through a very difficult period. Despite his wealth, he felt deeply sad and alone. Imagine having everything you want in terms of material things, but not having anyone to really share your life with. This is how Anthony felt. He lived in a big and beautiful house, but it was a silent place, almost like a museum, full of things that did not bring true happiness. The few relatives who visited him only appeared when they needed money, and the friends he had seemed more interested in his fortune than in his company. Anthony was surrounded by people, but deep down, he was always alone. That loneliness weighed on Anthony's heart, making him question the true value of money and possessions. When Achilles entered Anthony's life, everything began to change for the better. Before, Anthony was constantly wondering what the purpose of having so much money was if he didn't have anyone to really share the joys of life with. But Achilles' arrival opened a new chapter full of hope and happiness. Achilles was not just a dog. He became the most loyal companion that Anthony could wish for. Every day with Achilles was a new adventure. Hours passed exploring the great garden, running after the leaves that flew with the wind, and resting under the old trees that decorated the property. Achilles always found a way to make Anthony laugh, either with his mischief or simply with an accomplice look. With Achilles close, Anthony rediscovered simple pleasures that he had forgotten. They visited the local park, where Achilles ran happily, making new friends and smiling at the faces of the people who passed by. At home, the nights were filled with games of fetch and moments of relaxation next to the fireplace, where Achilles snuggled close to Anthony, happy to be just by his side. The relationship between Anthony and Achilles was more than that of an owner and his pet, it was a true friendship. Achilles taught Anthony that true happiness does not come from possessing many things but from being connected with others and sharing moments that touch the heart. Achilles' presence brought a new energy to Anthony's life, showing him that life can be rich and full of joy in ways that money could never buy. When Anthony's health began to fail, a new challenge arose in his life, threatening the peace he had found next to Achilles. Diagnosed with a serious illness, Anthony had to be hospitalized in a hospital to receive intensive medical care. What should have been a moment of support and solidarity became a test of their family relationships. Anthony's family, who rarely showed genuine interest in him, suddenly became a constant presence by his side. However, it was not the concern for Anthony's health that moved them, but the greed for the vast fortune he possessed. They took charge of his life, deciding on treatments and plans without consulting his wishes, isolating him in a hospital room far from any real contact with the outside world. This forced isolation left Anthony increasingly desolate. Far from his home, and what was more painful, far from Achilles, he felt a deep loneliness that no medical treatment could cure. Although frequent, their visits were cold and calculated, leaving him in a state of constant sadness and frustration. In those moments of solitude, Anthony found some comfort in the memories of the happy days next to Achilles. He remembered every walk, every game, and every moment of simple joy they shared. These memories were a reminder of what really mattered in his life and what wealth really meant. Faced with the reality of his condition and the behavior of his family, Anthony began to reflect on the future of his fortune. He wished that his legacy would be more than just a sum of money left for people who really did not value it. This reflection led him to consider a different destiny for his assets, something that reflected the love and the transformation that Achilles had brought to his life. He began to idealize a plan, even in secret, that he could express his true wishes and leave a positive impact much beyond his existence. Before continuing, just remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you love animals and their exciting stories. During the long days of recovery at the hospital, Anthony had a lot of time to reflect on his life and the true sources of happiness. Achilles' presence in his life was a turning point, showing that true wealth is not accumulated in bank accounts but in sincere relationships and in gestures of love and care. Inspired by this transformation and wishing to do something significant beyond his existence, Anthony formulated a plan that would reflect his new values. He thought that Achilles, a simple rescued dog, had brought so much light and joy to his dark days. The idea that other animals could do the same for other lonely people or those in emotional suffering began to take shape in his mind. With this inspiration, Anthony decided to redirect his fortune in a way that perpetuated the kind of kindness that Achilles represented. With care and determination, he wrote a detailed letter to his lawyer, specifying his new intentions for the fate of his wealth. He wanted all his heritage to be donated to non-governmental organizations and community shelters dedicated to the adoption of animals. These places, he thought, were points of light where human and animal lives could meet and be saved together, as he and Achilles had met. This plan was not just a disposition of his assets, it was a manifestation of his deepest beliefs. Anthony imagined that, through his fortune, he could create a wave of positive transformations, offering others the same opportunity of happiness that he had found. He saw his decision as a seed that could germinate in countless stories of love and companionship between humans and animals. In addition, Anthony wished that this gesture would encourage other people to recognize the value and importance of love and care for animals. He dreamed that, by giving this example, more people would feel inspired to contribute or adopt animals, spreading even more joy and love. With these actions, he expected not only to change the lives of countless animals but also to touch the hearts of many people, creating a more loving and supportive community. While signing the paper that would determine the fate of his fortune, Anthony deeply reflected on the darkest periods of his life. He remembered the days of depression, where sadness was a constant and agony a frequent companion. He remembered the intense loneliness that consumed him, a silent despair that resounded through the empty corridors of his great house. It was a time when he felt surrounded by people but isolated in his own inner world, a world where love and affection seemed distant myths. Those days were marked by a pain that went beyond physical, touching the depths of his soul. He lived surrounded by interested people, people who approached him with easy smiles and hidden intentions, seeking to benefit from his wealth without offering anything in return. The absence of true companionship made it more and more difficult to face, and the weight of loneliness made his life, despite all possessions and luxuries, seem empty and meaningless. That intense reflection on his most difficult moments made him realize how transformative Achilles' arrival had been to his life. The dog not only brought joy and company but also the rescue of his ability to feel hope and joy again. Signing that document was more than a transfer of riches, it was an act of gratitude and recognition for the unconditional love that Achilles gave him. A final gesture to spread that love and allow others to experience the same transformation that he lived. When Anthony decided to donate all his fortune to help abandoned animals and in shelters, his family was moved and furious. They could not understand how Anthony could waste all the wealth he had accumulated throughout his life with strangers and animals instead of leaving it to them. In that tumult of emotions and greed, they began to see Achilles, the dog that had brought so much joy to Anthony's life, as an obstacle to their plans. Impelled by resentment, they made a cruel decision to leave Achilles. On a sad and gloomy day, without Anthony knowing it, they took Achilles away from the mansion and left him alone in the streets, waiting for him to never find the way back home. For them, Achilles was nothing more than a reminder of Anthony's decision that prevented them from accessing the fortune they wanted so much. Achilles, accustomed to the comfort and constant love of Anthony, suddenly found himself alone in an unknown world. Without understanding what had happened or why he had been left behind, he wandered the streets, confused and scared. Every car that passed, every stranger he found, increased his fear and anxiety. He missed the safe and loving home he had, and more than anything, he missed Anthony. The poor dog spent his days looking for something familiar, any sign that would take him back home, but every night he brought with him the harsh reality that he was alone. Here he faced hunger, cold, and loneliness, a situation that he never imagined he would live. However, even in the most desperate circumstances, his spirit did not break completely. He kept the hope, no matter how small, of meeting again with the man who had become his best friend and savior. This abandonment not only deeply affected Achilles, but it would also be a turning point in the fate of all involved, unleashing a series of events that no one could have predicted. Abandoned cruelly by Anthony's family, Achilles was alone in a completely strange and hostile world. Far from the comfort and security of the mansion where he had been raised with so much love and care, now faced the tough challenges of life on the streets, a harsh and implacable reality for an animal accustomed to the comfort of a home. In the early days of abandonment, Achilles wandered the streets, confused and disoriented. He could not understand why they had left him there, far from Anthony, the person who meant the world to him. The noisy streets, full of cars that honked non-stop, and the sidewalks full of people who barely noticed his presence, were terrifying. Each new face was a reminder that Anthony was not close. Hunger began to tighten soon. Achilles, who was used to having his meals carefully prepared and served at regular times, now had to look for remnants in the trash containers or wait for some compassionate passerby to offer him a piece of food. The clean water, once a constant, became a rare luxury. Frequently, he had to settle for dirty water from puddles or drink directly from puddles formed by the rain in the streets. In addition to hunger and thirst, loneliness was one of the most acute pains that Achilles faced. He felt a huge lack of Anthony, his voice, his touch, and the safe warmth of his home. Each corner, each shadow of the trees in the streets reminded him of the happy days that now seemed like a distant dream. But, despite the pain and fear, within Achilles still burned the hope of meeting his dear friend again. That hope became the force that drove him to move forward, despite the adversities. The nights were particularly difficult. Achilles was looking for shelter in alleys or under the eaves of the stores, where the cold of the asphalt and the discomfort of the hard surfaces proved their resistance. The penetrating cold and sleepless nights were a constant test for his tired body, but the image of Anthony and the memory of the moments of joy they shared kept his spirit alive. On a night especially stormy, with the sky covered with black clouds and the wind howling through the almost deserted streets, an unexpected hope shone for Achilles. A woman known for her compassion and kind heart was returning home after an exhausting day at work. Despite the weather, she decided to take a shortcut through a local park, hoping to cut her path soaked to her home. As the rain increased, hitting the pavement unpleasantly and creating puddles that quickly turned into small lakes, Elizabeth heard a sound that deeply moved her. It was a weak moan, almost lost between the sounds of the storm. Impelled by an instinct of help, she followed the direction of the sound, with her flashlight cutting the darkness and the rain. After a few minutes of search, Elizabeth found Achilles. The poor dog was crouched under a small bridge in the park, trying to protect himself from the cutting cold and the relentless rain. He was completely soaked, with hair stuck to his body, trembling not only from cold but also from fear. His eyes reflected a mixture of surprise and relief when he saw a human figure approaching. Elizabeth, seeing the deplorable state of the dog, did not think twice. Carefully, she approached, speaking with a soft voice to calm him down. Achilles, although initially doubtful, allowed her to approach and touch him. Feeling the gentleness in her touch, he took a small step towards her, looking for comfort. Quickly, she wrapped him in her coat, protecting him from the rain, and carried him in her arms to her house, which fortunately was not far away. Once at home, Elizabeth provided him with a warm and dry place. She dried his wet coat with towels and prepared a soft bed near the heater. To make sure he ate, she prepared a nutritious meal that Achilles devoured with an appetite that he had not felt in days. In the following days, Elizabeth took care of Achilles with all the love and attention she could offer. However, she noticed that, despite comfort and care, Achilles seemed frequently lost in his thoughts, as if he was always waiting or looking for something or someone. Intrigued and worried, Elizabeth decided to investigate more thoroughly the origin of Achilles. Hoping to discover the key to his persistent sadness, and perhaps, find a way to return the brightness to his eyes. As Achilles was recovering physically under the care of Elizabeth, she realized that, despite her comfortable and safe environment, the dog seemed frequently restless. Achilles had the habit of running towards the door every time he heard cars or voices on the street, as if he were waiting for someone familiar to appear at any time. Intrigued by this behavior, Elizabeth decided to investigate more about Achilles' past. Determined to understand the origin of Achilles' anxiety, Elizabeth began searching the internet. She surfed social networks, adoption sites, and lost objects pages, hoping to find some clue that could connect Achilles with his previous owner. During her searches, she found several photos of a man with a dog that looked exactly like Achilles. The photos showed the man and the dog in several happy moments, clearly sharing a deep bond. Impelled by the possibility of reuniting Achilles with his owner, Elizabeth went deeper into her investigation, discovering that the man in the photos was Anthony, a seemingly successful person, but about whom little was known online. The information was scarce, but Elizabeth was determined to get to the end. Then, she contacted local veterinarians, shelters, and even animal rescue groups, sharing photos of Anthony and Achilles, asking if anyone knew or had information about them. Her inquiries eventually led her to a lawyer who recognized Anthony by Elizabeth's descriptions. The lawyer, surprised and cautious, confirmed that Achilles was actually Anthony's beloved dog, but revealed that Anthony had recently gone through serious health and family problems. With the information obtained and a plan in mind, Elizabeth prepared Achilles for the possible reunion with Anthony. She assured that he was well-fed and well-mannered, wanting Anthony to see Achilles in his best state, as loved and cared for as before. With the help of the lawyer, who shared Anthony's current address, Elizabeth went to the hospital where Anthony was hospitalized. Upon arriving at the hospital, Elizabeth felt a mixture of nervousness and hope. She led Achilles through the corridors, guided by a nurse who knew Anthony's delicate situation. As she approached Anthony's room, Achilles began to show palpable emotion, pulling the leash and anxiously sniffing the air, as if recognizing the path. Anthony was lying between the sounds of looking out the window, visibly weaker than in the photos she had seen. She followed the direction of the sound. As he heard the door open, with her flashlight cutting the darkness and to see what his eyes found. After a few minutes of search, a cheerful Elizabeth found Achilles. The scene was pure joy. The poor dog was crouched under a small bridge in the park, trying to protect himself from the cutting cold, while Elizabeth watched, excited about facilitating that reunion. With hair stuck to his body. The nurse, in the background, trembling not only from cold by the scene, but also from commenting that she hadn't seen Anthony. His eyes so excited a mixture of surprise and relief when he saw a human figure approach Elizabeth, expressing his gratitude for taking care of Achilles and making the effort to bring him back. He shared with her how the days had been dark without his faithful friend, and how Achilles' presence now gave him strength, although initially doubtful, the challenges allowed her to approach the complicated family issues. Feeling the gentleness in her touch, after the emotional reunion with Achilles, he took a small step towards her, recover not only his health, but also his willpower. She wrapped him in her coat, trying to take advantage of his condition, and carried him in her arms to her house, which fortunately was not far recovering his strength. Marcos appeared in the hospital with documents him with a warm and dry place were necessary to manage family business during Anthony's incapacity. A soft bed near the heater. However, Anthony, to make sure more alert and supported by Elizabeth, she prepared a nutritious meal that Achilles devoured with an appetite that the management of his fortune to Marcos irreversibly. In the following days, Elizabeth that took care of Achilles with all the love and attention she could offer. That he signed the papers quickly. She noticed that it was for the comfort and care, and the family seemed frequently lost in his thoughts. Anthony, as if a recently recovered clarity and the emotional support of Achilles by his side. Intrigued and worried, Elizabeth decided to investigate more thoroughly any document without proper legal review, hoping to discover the key to his persistent fortune, and perhaps the confrontation returned the brightness to his eyes. Marcos tried to manipulate Anthony, was recovering physically under the care of Elizabeth. Anthony's weak realized that, suggesting that her comfortable and safe environment, the dog seemed frequently strengthened by Achilles' presence, and Elizabeth's had the habit of running towards the door every time he expressed his disappointment voices at Marcos' actions, as if he were waiting for someone familiar to his condition to be exploited. Intrigued by this behavior, who was next to Anthony during the confrontation, more about Achilles when it was necessary. Determined to understand the origin of Achilles' anxiety, and an independent lawyer began searching all documents. She served social networks, crucial to help Anthony maintain calm and assertiveness against Marcos' hoping to find some clue that could connect Achilles with his previous to manipulate. Marcos left her search visibly irritated, she found several photos of a man with a dog that looked exactly like Achilles. The photos showed the man not only protected Anthony's fortunes, clearly sharing but also reaffirmed his autonomy and the right to decide about his own reuniting Achilles with his own. Elizabeth went deeper into her investigation with Marcos, discovering that the man in the photos was Anthony, he needed a more peaceful and successful person to continue his recovery and reorganize his life. The information with the help of Elizabeth, but her trusted was determined Anthony decided to leave the hospital and return to his mansion. She contacted on rural veterinarians, shelters, that place represented rescue groups, sharing photos of Anthony physically and emotionally, asking if anyone knew or had information about his family. Her inquiries eventually led her to a lawyer who recognized Anthony by Elizabeth's was the perfect place for Anthony to start a new phase of his life. Cautious, confirmed that Achilles was actually Anthony's beloved Achilles arrived. The fresh air and serenity of Anthony had recently gone through serious health and family problems. Achilles, happy to be back in his home, obtained ran through the plan in mind. Elizabeth exploring every corner as if he were making sure that everything was in order. She assured that he was well-fed and well-mannered. Achilles so happy brought him a feeling of peace and optimism that he had not been cared for as before. Elizabeth, who had already become more than a friend to Anthony, took on a crucial role in his hospital where Anthony was hospitalized. She helped him organize his new routine. Upon arriving at the hospital, that he had the necessary rest, a mixture of nervousness and of fresh air rest. She led Achilles through the corridors, strengthen his body, guided by a nurse who knew Anthony's delicate situation. He dedicated himself as she approached Anthony's gardens. Achilles began to show palpable emotion, while in the afternoon anxiously sniffing the air, to deep conversations about the future. As the days passed in the mansion, Anthony began to feel stronger and stronger. Not only physically but also emotionally. It had been extremely difficult times, but now, with Achilles and Elizabeth by his side, he felt that there was a new purpose in his life. Every day he recovered a little more, and the constant presence of Elizabeth began to awaken feelings that he did not expect. The care and dedication that Elizabeth showed towards Anthony went beyond simple friendship. They began to share not only daily tasks but also dreams and hopes for the future. The conversations that initially focused on Anthony's recovery and Achilles' well-being began to deepen, addressing personal and emotional issues. Anthony realized that Elizabeth was not only a friend but a true companion, someone who was by his side in the most difficult moments and who, little by little, filled the void that existed in his heart before. Elizabeth, on the other hand, also felt a growing connection with Anthony. What began as a gesture of kindness when she rescued Achilles became a relationship of respect, affection, and, eventually, love. Over time, Anthony and Elizabeth came to see the mansion not only as a temporary refuge but as a home where they could build a life together. Achilles' presence, which had been the catalyst for so many positive changes in Anthony's life, now also formed part of this new family that was being formed. Together, they lit up a future full of hope, love, and companionship, where every day was an opportunity to grow and strengthen, both as individuals and as a couple. Thank you very much for watching the video until the end. Remember to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your opinion about this story.